EQ is the most powerful tool in your arsenal. Knowing how to use it right will allow you to change the timbre or the tone of a different sound, allowing it to evolve over time, keeping your track interesting, or allowing you to remove mud from a mix in order to keep things clean and audible. In today's video, I'm going to be showing you pretty much everything you need to know about how to use an EQ, starting from the basics all the way up to some more advanced tips that I use in literally every single track that I work with. So I'm going to start with one little quiz, and that is, do you need an EQ on every track? Or I guess more so, should you have an EQ on every track? The answer is you should. And if you think that you don't, then you should watch this video. Let's get into it. All right, we're in FL Studio here. There's two kinds of EQ you'll probably be using, either a graphic EQ or a parametric EQ. Graphic EQ is your standard kind of hardware, just a bunch of these sliders. A parametric EQ is going to give you a little bit more free range to see what the heck you are doing. The way an EQ is set up, we've got low frequencies on the left, high frequencies on the right, and this allows us to cut or boost certain frequencies within that range, and that allows us to change the actual tone or the timbre of an instrument, or in this case, I'm going to show you with a full mix. So let me put my headphones on and I'll show you what I've been working on recently, and then how an EQ is going to change the tone of it very clearly. Here we go. So if I start removing high frequencies, right, we'll only have the low end or the bass, and you'll be able to hear my voice better because my voice takes up the higher frequency range. And then if I remove the bass, so the low end, is that interesting? So in an EQ, you can either fully cut out like all the low frequency content, which we'll be discussing in a moment, or you can do lots of minor little movements. For example, if I notice that there's some harshness, which usually comes from the 1 to 3,000 hertz range, which is where your ears are most sensitive, I may boost or cut just some frequency energy within that area. For example, this area with the super sol may be a little harsh on your ears. So what I could do within that instrument itself, I'm of course doing it to the full mix, but within that instrument I could lower a little bit of that 3,000 hertz range, and you'll notice it'll be a little bit more pleasant on your ears. This is something that you really have to work with and mess around with a bit. I can show you some tricks, but at the end of the day, you gotta just play around with an EQ and see how it changes and adjusts things. Here's a good example of an EQ in action. I've got this guitar line, and see how it sounds a little bit dull? I can brighten it up by boosting the high frequency range. So this is it without the EQ. This is it with the EQ. And if you actually listen to what I'm doing here, this is kind of what it sounded like before. And then if I start boosting more and more high frequencies, it's a little bit clearer on your ears, a little bit brighter. So when people are mastering music, many times the mix that they've created doesn't sound as bright as the other professional tracks that they're referencing. So it's very common for people to have a little bit of that high-end boost. You'll also notice that for this guitar, I've removed everything below about 80 hertz. And the reason why I'm doing that is because if you have any extra noise or any extra reverb tails that are within that range, I can just play what's going on here, you'll notice there's some energy, some noise that's going on that isn't necessarily musical and not something we want. And the problem with this is if we have like 5 different tracks going on, or for me doing a lot of my electronic music work, or if I'm scoring a symphony, I'll have like 50 tracks sometimes at once if I'm getting really extreme. If I have all that extra noise in sort of that low end area, it will all stack up and become super muddy. So what you want to do when you're producing is make sure that you do what's called a high pass filter, where we remove a lot of that low frequency energy where it's not needed. So of course with basses, we're still going to keep it in there, but if we just have this guitar, I'm going to make sure that I high pass up until what's known as the fundamental frequency, or that lowest, loudest frequency that we're hearing right now. You'll notice in this little mix here that I've made that these snare drums sound fantastic. The reason why they hit nice and hard is 1, due to the way that I've compressed them, so they have a strong peak, but 2, due to the way that I EQ'd them. And I'm going to show you how we EQ snare drums in order to get them to hit hard, which is something that almost every rock band wants to have, or any electronic dance music producer would love to understand. So let's get into it. Here's my snare before. Now we're going to EQ it and give it a little bit of a boost. One thing is I want to be a little bit brighter. So I'm going to increase some of that high frequency energy. I'm doing this a little bit aggressively. I probably wouldn't increase it by 6 decibels, which you can see over here on the right. But I want you to be able to hear the difference. No EQ, EQ. The next thing I'm going to do is remove all the extra energy on the low end that we don't need with a high-pass filter, as I explained before. And to show you what that sounds like that I'm removing, it's all that extra little noise back here in the low end that we just don't need. And once again, if you have lots of instruments that have a little bit of extra noise down there, it's all going to stack up. So if you're mixing music, you're usually going to have an EQ on every mixer channel that's removing all of that low frequency content. So one EQ to remove the low frequency content we don't need. And then what I'm going to do with a snare drum is sometimes give it a little boost in the fundamental, which again is that lowest, loudest frequency. Without getting too complex into the way audio mechanics work, that fundamental is what establishes the pitch of an instrument, and it's also within drums usually what gives the drum its body, so it's really full feeling opposed to its, maybe you could call it air, which is the higher range that we've already boosted. So if we're looking at this little number 3 here, this peak that I've added onto this EQ, you'll notice that now when I play the snare, it has a little bit more of a body to it. So if I play the before and after, this is before, and this is after. So after is a little bit brighter, it has a little bit more body to it, a little bit stronger. Once again, with some compression, we'll then end up getting the snare that I had before. Another way EQs can be used is in order to have a sound evolve over time. If we can change how bright or how dull it is, then we can make the sound change similarly to how a human voice changes or an instrument changes when you play it loudly or softly. For example, if you play a guitar really softly, it's going to sound a little bit more mellow, it's going to have less high frequency energy compared to if you strum it real hard. Same with the human voice. If I talk like this, a little bit quieter, versus if I talk like this, you'll have a little bit more high frequency energy when I'm louder versus when I'm softer. So over time, what I could do with this saw chord that's going on is I could start by making it a little bit quieter in the high frequency range, and then as it evolves, bringing back in some of that high frequency energy. And that just allows the music to evolve and change over time, which keeps it interesting in our ears because we're not hearing the same thing over and over again. So if you want to add a little bit more expression and make your music kind of swell or evolve, similar to what you would do with an orchestra, you can do the same thing with synths by adjusting EQ. This is the exact same concept as how a filter works. For example, if I have a high-pass filter here, that's just removing the low frequencies. It's just an EQ that's moving versus if I get a low pass, that's removing the high frequencies. This is really cool. If you have any kind of like bioacoustics background, you'll literally go in and look at like, I don't know, say the ocean or a rainforest, and you can use those kinds of audio filters to remove excess noise or only allow certain frequency ranges for certain species that you're looking at. So if you're looking at something like a snapping shrimp in the ocean, or if you're looking at something like a bellbird in the Amazon rainforest, you're able to better pull out those sounds by using these kinds of filters. Of course, within audio, just for music, we usually just use them to have the kind of interesting effect of an evolving, changing sound over time. The final tip that I'm going to show you is how to use an EQ to make things not sound like they're going to make your ears bleed. What we're going to do is we're going to take this guitar that sounds pretty annoying already, and I'm going to make one little peak, and I'm going to find this specific frequency that's causing my little ear damage. So if I were to move this peak, you'll notice that occasionally we'll hit a frequency that'll really hurt our ears. For example, that one. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to surgically just turn down that frequency a little bit. And if we do this a couple of times and find those really annoying resonance points where the reverb has just stacked up in the wrong way, we're able to surgically remove the most harsh frequencies and have a slightly nicer sounding guitar. Of course, we're still making it sound aggressive with the distortion and everything, but it's an improvement. Okay, so now you understand, I guess, the basics of equalization as well as a little bit more of advanced tips. You're also able to do like adaptive EQ stuff where, similar to a compressor, if something becomes loud enough where it reaches a certain threshold, we can turn down an EQ peak. That stuff gets a little bit more complex. I just want to show you the basics in this video. If you have any questions, leave them below. I'll get to those questions whenever I can, or you can just DM me on Instagram. And besides that, if this video was at least a little bit helpful, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you can stay up to date for future videos. All right, that's all I have for you, and I'll see you next time.